Welcome to the Education Innovators Podcast. I'm Eric Byron, and it is my privilege to host this show where I get to talk to folks from all over the world who are education thought leaders and innovators. We'll hear inspiring stories from educators, edtech founders, AI experts, and others who are fearlessly innovating and delivering unique learning experiences. I'm glad you're here. Let's get started.
I believe strongly that, the AI is not going to replace teachers, but AI that is used by teachers will make those teachers better than either an AI by itself or a teacher, even the best teachers. I think the best teachers will be AI empowered over the next years. If it's done right, it's like a team, right? They make up more than their individual constituent parts, right? 1 + 1 = 3.
That is Chris Hess from Pearson. And I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. Chris is an educator and an AI expert. He's actually a longtime teacher who crossed over into edtech. And he's got this great combination of understanding what happens in a classroom, what teachers need, and the possibilities with AI. So keep listening. Really good stuff ahead. Welcome to the Education Innovators Podcast. I am Eric Byron, and today I have with me Chris Hess from Pearson. So Chris is currently the Director of AI Product Management, Higher Education at Pearson, where he combines his rich experience as a former university professor with his passion for education technology. With a Ph.D. in biological sciences from the University of Washington, Chris has transitioned seamlessly into the edtech space, focusing on the development and strategic vision of AI products in higher education. He has been instrumental in launching innovative AI tools for both students and instructors, enhancing the learning and teaching experience. Okay, so yes, that was me reading his bio, but it was a really good one. I like it, and I'm so happy to have Chris join us. So welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me, Eric. And you will not be surprised to hear that I should offer writing credits to ChatGPT for that bio. It helped me out.
Oh, there you go. Okay. Got
Why
ChatGPT
not?
to write that. Yeah. Good.
Yeah,
Good.
made it better. And that's the idea.
It made you better. Oh, good. All right. Yes. Well, we're gonna have some fun. Well, before we dive really into Pearson and the AI tools, the stuff you're working on there, I'd like to get to know you a little bit better. And so I spotted this thing on your profile on LinkedIn that you were a triathlon coach. And so I want to see if we can draw a correlation here. So I find this fascinating. I'm also, really impressed with anybody who does this sort of thing, because I haven't run since the 70s, literally. Bad knees. I've done some bicycling and some swimming, but I can't run at all. Not, literally, if it was one of those, zombie apocalypse and run for your life, I'd be the first one gone because I don't run. Anyway, but for you, I'm wondering, say, what correlation you might draw between, what goes into being an effective coach for triathlon athletes and being a teacher, or even working at Pearson, on a team trying to build the newest, latest, greatest AI tools.
Yeah, great question, Eric. So, I joined Pearson 13 years ago when, I have the two-body problem with my wife. She's also a professor. And so we were looking for some geographic flexibility, and I was teaching at Butler University, and she wanted to, look for another job somewhere else. And so I asked Pearson, how could I find a job with you guys? I'd been kind of a faculty advisor for them. But I think the point of mentioning that is, once a teacher, always a teacher. I think this is really true. And I think everybody's got a little bit of teacher in them. And when I started thinking about the triathlon coaching thing, I was doing triathlons myself. Obviously, that's what got me excited about it. But I really thought it was one of these cool opportunities to help people in a way that's related, because the general idea is people are not really good at figuring out what the next best thing is to do to get better. And there's a term in learning science called zone of proximal development. It's one that I really love, right? If you can get into that area where you're making yourself a little bit of put yourself in a little bit of struggle, but not to the point of frustration. That's when you can make incremental gains. There's a great podcast about triathlon and whatnot called Incremental Gains. And I think cycling is primarily on there. But that's the idea. If you can get into that zone, then that's where you can really make the most progress. If you push yourself too hard, you'll get yourself injured and you'll get yourself frustrated, and then you're going to stop doing it. So that's hard to do as an athlete or as a student. I think it's very hard to do. Students, I think, are terrible at self-assessing. I think athletes often are times, like, hey, I'm going to sign up for an Ironman and then I'm going to go out and run 15 miles today, and then you're on the shelf for a while. So it's the coach that can really think about, well, how do I put the student into that perfect zone that is where the magic can happen? And look, I mean, I did the triathlon coaching thing for a while, and really it was something that was fun. It made me no money because it's, like I wasn't as good as the other coaches, and that was fine. But I enjoyed like being able to take an athlete and say, this is how fast you should run today, Eric. And we got to get you a certain amount of zone 2. Let's mix in some swimming. Let's really take a look at your form. So send me a video. I can improve, your stroke a little bit. And I used some really cool software that was AI focused. It's through a company called TriDot. And this was before generative AI, but the idea was they could take all of the data on all the athletes that they'd been tracking, and they could say, Eric's got this level of ability in running and swimming and biking, and we know he's got an upcoming race for this distance, and they knew all about the races, and they put that into their database. And we could say, if you want to have the maximum output between now and then, the maximal gains, this is the run you should do today, and then this is the swim you should do tomorrow. And then every time you did that, it would plug back in. So it was supervised learning that was on steroids, because the more athletes they got, the better it did at recommending these things. And so you can think of that sort of thing transitioning to the classroom, or for an edtech company like Pearson, right? So we have tons of data. We can say, maybe it's not an Ironman, but maybe it's a chemistry exam, right, that you need to get prepared for. And we can say, well, for students that were here at time point A and they were getting ready for exam at time point B, what is the best equivalent of swim, bike, run workouts to get you to the point of being able to succeed on that summative exam, which is really what a race is in triathlon. So I think these things have tremendous overlap, and I just love the idea of how do we thoughtfully put a student into that zone of proximal development using both human expertise and potentially some of these wonderful technology things that leverage both the data on the individual and the existing, gestalt of data that we can get a hold of. It's really cool.
Yeah. Awesome. And, it struck a chord with me too, because, I came from the video game industry. And so this concept, right, is very, common too in game design,
100%.
both commercial and educational games, right? You gotta push them just hard enough so they're challenged, but not so hard that they get frustrated and quit. But it can't be so easy either, right? Too easy or too hard are both failing mechanics in game design. And yes, and I think a lot of instructional learning is the same thing, right? You got to find that level. What's the right level? And I think this is one of the challenges I hear so often on this show, right? Is the teachers who have come with that frustration that, they're given this curriculum and it's, march your 30 students through this exact curriculum at this pace, and every student is unique, right? What's challenging for one is not challenging for another. What's easy for one is not easy for another, yet I got to stick to the program and we're all going to take that exam at the end, the exact same exam. And, yeah, it's problematic. So
yeah, it's really difficult to juggle. And I think, we think about this a lot. so, I don't think we're going to get out of that cycle completely, right? There's going to have to be some sort of summative exams, but maybe less so, because if you could, I mean, I'm a fan of the idea of competency based education. Like if you could have students moving at different paces through something, and I do think there'll be interesting things that come out of some of this AI stuff with aggregating an individual's data, and then maybe even having the AI ultimately be a recommender, right? I mean, it will know a lot about you in a hopefully in a thoughtful and non-biased and human
Creepy,
centered
right?
way. Yes, but like I could imagine a real nice synergy between hiring managers and companies having their AI bots talk to doing a screener with individual potential employees bots. These are cool sort of ideas. But back to your gamification thing, I love this topic. I mean, I really think it's wonderful. My son is 12 and he's addicted to video games just like his dad was when he was 12.
Okay.
And we're super susceptible to the dopamine hit, right? I mean, and that's exactly what gaming, the gaming industry leverages. And I struggle with this a little bit because like he always wants to do these micro purchases. He buys all these free to play games, but then there are always these micro purchases. I'm like,
Yep.
look, Levi, you know, all you're going to do is put yourself into the next roadblock where you are going to have to pay again. Like, just do it
It's
as a free to play
designed
player.
for that, Chris.
Yeah.
It's exactly
Oh,
what they're.
I get it. I get it. But
Yeah.
you're only gonna move yourself to the next potential roadblock, and then they're gonna ask for more money. But I think in in education, there's an opportunity to leverage that for good, and the same thing in training or anything like that. If you can get that dopamine hit because you're making progress, and you can see that tangibly, even in something like I worked forever in chemistry education at Pearson. That's been one of the things that's been consistent. And frankly, most students don't want to take a chemistry class. There's a few students who want to be chemists, but most of them are taking that course because they want to become doctors or dentists or something like that, or a
Yep.
nurse. They're just doing that to get the grade so that they can get into medical school or nursing school or whatever. So, but they still like the dopamine hit, right? So they like to see progress. If we can give them that incremental progress that we were talking about earlier. So I think about like how to leverage that for good. And the same thing is, if you shave 5 seconds off your mile time, that motivates you the
Yeah.
next morning. You get up and say, "Oh, I got a 6 a.m. run to do," because you've seen the progress, and now you
Yep.
want to beat that time. So there's opportunities here, and how can sort of these innovations help supercharge those? That's something we think about a lot. Really fun.
Yeah. No, it's good. Well, let's talk about what you are doing there at Pearson. And so I'm going to attempt to interpret what I took from some of what you guys are doing there.
Yeah, sure.
So, and
Yeah.
then you can tell me how badly I've butchered this. All right. So
Here.
my understanding is, so you've got a tool, at least the one that I saw the demo on, right? It's a tool that will take the curriculum, right? So you've got course materials get uploaded
Mhm.
to the system, and then it goes through and it pulls out appropriate questions to assess a student's comprehension of that material. And this is significant. It's an important or a significant time saver for teachers, because the materials typically could have hundreds of questions. And for a teacher to try and go through all of those questions and figure out which ones are best for her students, is very time consuming. And so the AI can do that for them. So is that
Yeah, so
close?
that's
Is that
one of the efforts that we have, and you actually did a really good job of explaining it. Well done. I'll go into a little bit more detail, and then I'll tell you kind of what we're thinking about this long term. So yes, the idea is that, like, if you're in a mathematics course, you might say, hey, I assign this courseware to my students where they get additional practice on every chapter. I sequence these assignments throughout the course of the semester so that it helps them prepare for their tests. And so, yeah, pick a random chapter in this math book that we first launched this in. There might be 500 or 600 problems in that chapter. So to individually go through all of those as an instructor and vet them is ridiculously time consuming. So what we have done is we have basically built an application layer on top of all this information that allows you to use a natural language chat and just say, I want a chapter 3 assignment that has 30 questions and is a mix of medium and easy problems. And the tool then leverages an LLM with some APIs. We don't need to get into the nitty gritty technical stuff, but and it produces a straw man assignment with that, request in mind in less than 60 seconds. So, that's the idea here, is that think about the individual instructor jobs that you need to do. And I always make this statement, and so sorry if it's redundant for people that have heard me talk before, but when I was teaching, I always felt like I was dropping the ball on either teaching, scholarship, or service, because there's an expectation on all those fronts for most professors. And so if you could lower the energy needed to accomplish any one of those things, you could spend more time on the thing that you're falling short on. And that's hugely valuable. So individual professors might have different motivations. Like my advisor was, he was a wonderful scholar, right? He's in the National Academy of Sciences now. He's an endowed chair at Harvard. He was really focused on scholarship. If he could make his teaching a little bit easier, he was motivated to do that. But some people would want to make their teaching even better, right? They would want to offsource some of the things. So that's what we're thinking about mostly, Eric, is like, how could we do that? So right now, that's a pretty simple thing that we can do. But imagine longer term, and we can't do this yet, but imagine longer term, you ask the bot to say, I loved my chapter 3 assignment. Here's my syllabus. You can see what other assignments I want to create. Could you create an equivalent assignment for every one of those topics? And so now you've gone from like having to create 30 assignments maybe to one, and then it scales that to the rest of the curriculum. Or let's get really fun. You could imagine, I'm really interested. I just read the book Make It Stick. I love that idea of spaced repetition and interleaving topics or something like that. I want to embed this learning science in my entire course. And so you just ask the bot and it says, well, okay, well, I'll give a chapter 3 assignment. And then in chapter 4, I'll make sure I include some stuff from chapter 3, especially focused on the stuff that students mostly struggle on. And then add in a data layer to all this, where potentially a student, a group of students complete their chapter 3 assignment, and you get a notification that says, here are the specific learning objectives that they struggled on in chapter 3. Do you want to add some very formative items to revisit those topics? So these are all things that, I just read Sam Altman's piece that came out recently about how optimistic he is about the future of AI. And I'm optimistic as well. But I think one of the things that he mentions at the beginning is, these felt like the dreams of your grandparents are the realities of today. In the education technology space, these were dreams of mine that felt like really pie in the sky type things. And we're not quite there yet, but we're making significant progress. And I'm really optimistic that we're going to deliver things that like make the learning and teaching process massively better in the near term. Sam's right about being optimistic in a lot of ways.
Good. We're going to dig more into Sam's letter here in a little bit, but I want to poke a little bit at what you were just talking about. So it sounded like this is still kind of a one size fits all, though, right? These assignments go to every student, the same questions. Is there a layer in there by which I could say, this student needs, a little more in this area, or like you were saying, repeat some of these things, right? That the AI starts to realize, okay, this one student, he's killing it on this type of problem, but in this other area, we need to grill him more. And so the next assignment actually is unique to that student's particular need. And even if that's suggestive, maybe, right? So it's the AI is going to the teacher and saying, so overall the class, struggled in these areas, did well in these areas, but these particular students, either were killing it here or were struggling there. And so you might adjust their individual assignments to feed into that. How much of that is either in play now or coming?
Love your idea, Eric. It's a great idea. So on the teacher side, that's future state for sure. But I got carried away talking about the teacher stuff. We've done a bunch of stuff on the student side already that kind of addresses your question.
Okay.
So think of this, the initial thing that's been out for over a year now for students, both in our electronic texts and in our courseware platforms, are some bots. I mean, everybody's building a bot, right? And why not? It's a wonderful idea. On the homework courseware side of things, we built this thing that we kind of internally call office hours. And to the market, it's called the MyLab Mastering AI Study Tool. And the premise was office hours. You go to office hours when you're struggling. But the reality is that most students don't come to office hours. They the ones that do are the ones that already know the answer and want to make sure. Or like I said, I was teaching mostly pre-med students, and many of them are not going to become doctors. And so you might have to help them with some career counseling about what their other options are. But what we did is we took problems that students were thinking about and thought about, well, how would you intervene on a struggle point if the students were working this problem? And so basically think of it as a priori to them missing this. We create a robust script using generative AI to kind of walk them through it. Now they can ask clarifying or contextual questions in this system, but really, like, imagine you're doing a gram to mole conversion in chemistry. There's a series of procedural steps that are necessary to answer that. And we walk them through it step by step. We actually alter the problem so that they're not just getting the exact answer to that problem. They're kind of learning the procedural fluency so they can transfer that to the original problem and hopefully a quiz or a test. But the idea is that we help that student with that specific problem. So that's step one. And to me, that feels awesome because it's like really wonderful that these students can get the help that they need in the moment. Most of the interactions are happening after 5 p.m., which, is when like a professor is not going to be available to answer their questions.
Right.
But it's pretty transactional, Eric. It's like we help you on problem 5. And then you go to problem 6. We're not necessarily understanding and learning what is best for you overall in your learning journey for that course. So that's coming soon. And in fact, we're really close on this, is if we could get the instructor to tell us when is the test and what's the test on. And if we knew that, we could aggregate your performance on every one of the problems that you complete leading up to that point and say, just like you mentioned earlier, Eric's killing it on this, weak on this. And then we give the student the opportunity to opt into an adaptive, personalized study session. We know pretty well, and there's cool things to think about longer term on this, but we know pretty well students are not going to do optional except right before the test. Most students are not going to do optional, but that's when they're scared, and that's when they're willing to put in a little bit of extra work. And so at that point, we have an opportunity to give them what they need the most. Now, I struggle with this a little bit because ultimately I think the most important thing students could learn is how to self-assess themselves and be able to do this on their own. So just giving them the information that what they're struggling on is kind of coddling them to a degree. So if you figure that out, or somebody figures that out, send them my way. I'd love to figure that out.
Yeah.
But what we can do is then say, here's the stuff on, chapter 3.1 that you need. Here's the stuff on chapter 3.2. You're doing great on that. We're not going to give you any more of that. We're just going to consider you ready to go. Because really, back in the day, I would have students, there's a bunch of books behind me. I would have students come in and say, Dr. Hess, I struggled on this test. I really studied hard. And I'll be like, well, what did you do? And they'd say, I read the book 10 times. Now, they don't do that probably anymore because I don't think any students are reading the book 10 times.
Yeah.
But they're not able to focus on the right thing. I mean, that's frankly a terrible strategy, right? It's a terrible strategy to be successful. You should be able to diagnose your problem and put in, personalized work toward rectifying that. And we can help with that. And I think that's really exciting. So the cool downstream thing, maybe you have ideas on this long term. How do we get that to be the norm? Like, how do we get students to develop better study habits and practice habits so that they don't cram that we don't have to rely upon that test fear as the only way that they'll get this work. Could we gamify it in some way so that
Yeah.
they finish the test and then they start doing this the next day?
Yeah. Well, the thing that pops in my head is, kind of continuous assessment, right? So instead of just summative, right, it's feedback all the time. The
Yeah.
student is being told, you know, dude, you're killing it here, but, you know, this other piece is going to be on the test. And, you've got 4 out of 5 wrong on the, there. So you need to focus on this. How can I help you? Right. Kind of thing. Right.
Yeah.
So they see this kind of constant feedback that says, here's where you are towards the learning objectives. Right. We, as you pointed out, right, the system's got to know up front, here's all the learning objectives. And for each piece of work that they do, right, they have that connection to it, right? The
Yeah.
system knows this is tied to that learning objective. So their performance on that, right? And performance to me is not just, did you get the right answer? It's how long did you spend getting the right answer? How much
Mhm.
did you thrash on this, right? Did you get right to it? Did it really seem to be clear? If I asked you a second, it was a lucky guess, right? I asked you a second question, from a slightly different angle, and you got that one too. Okay, you got it, right? It wasn't, you didn't just guess good, So,
Yeah.
but it's that constant assessment and constant feedback that's telling you, right? I can tell you're guessing because, it's like whack-a-mole here. You're just hitting answers
Yeah.
to see what the right answer is. And when you hit the right answer, you don't know why it's the right answer.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, this makes me think of a couple of really cool ideas. I love your train of thought here. I tried this one time. Was really nervous about it back when I was teaching. I gave no tests in a class, and I just gave a quiz every week. So a smaller
Yep.
assessment, but it was like every week you got a quiz. So there was no real opportunity for them to 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 lull into that complacency when there's a big gap, and it worked pretty well, but it was significant work. And I think these are the types of things, like, you think about, how can we change these things? The other thing
But you didn't have AI to help you put those
no,
quizzes together.
no, I didn't. And so yeah, now these, like, can we build an application layer that builds a
Yeah.
quiz for them and maybe even makes it dynamic? Like, a lot of these things are sort of summative and whatnot over the course of the cumulative over the course of the semester. Like, if they do something poorly on quiz 1, then you add more of that material to quiz 2 to make sure that they've rectified it. I love your idea.
Yeah.
The other thing I think about with these conversational AIs especially is, you mentioned the idea of a second question. And I think this is one of the things that we can really lean into. Is there's really great evidence in learning science about thinking about pairing a conceptual question or a procedural question with an opportunity for explanation. So it's perfectly great to ask a question like, which of these is wrong? But then the real learning happens when you say, explain to me why it's wrong. Right. And
Yeah.
I used to ask my students, write great multiple choice questions to quiz your students, your peers on, because writing the wrong, like good wrong distractors was where the most learning took place. So, like, and I think this is true in this case too, writing it, understanding why something was wrong is maybe even more valuable than understanding why something's right. So why don't we have, like, why don't we think about conversational AI to take what, is kind of a boring series of multiple choice questions and interleave those with some conversational aspects that really dig at the understanding. And I think this could be done on tests. So, like, why not make it so that a test, instead of a series of questions that you ask, why not give an answer and then give the student a score with using AI by giving it a rubric, and then offer them an opportunity to have a conversation with the AI that knows the answer in a way that allows them to maybe earn some other points back if they correct their understanding. I mean, that would be
Yeah.
amazing.
Okay. See, I promised good stuff and Chris is delivering. I love this zone of, proximal development discussion and the way that Chris was able to, kind of tie everything back to his teaching years, teaching chemistry. So, but first, before we continue, a quick plug for the Human Intelligence Movement. The mission of the human intelligence movement is to ensure that all students have the skills to thrive and succeed in a world with AI. Join the movement. There's a link in the show notes. All right. So getting back to our conversation with Chris Hess. So we now are entering into this zone of proximal development where the most impactful learning, from this episode happens in the second half. So we've had the appetizer. It's time for the main course. Keep listening. Well, this gets at, something else that I've been thinking a lot about recently. So I've gotten involved with this organization called the Human Intelligence Movement. I don't know if you've seen anything on them yet.
No.
I did have one of the founders on the show, but one of the things that, keeps kind of coming back for me is that it's not so a summative test, right, tests you on like a particular piece of knowledge, right? And what we found, and you hear people argue about this too, right? So what if I pass the test? If you gave me that same test a month later, right? I already flushed all of that. I'd moved on to the next thing. I couldn't pass it again a month later, even though I aced it a month ago, because in and out. I prepared for the exam and then it's gone. What's much more important is the thought process, right? How did you think about this, right? What was your rationale, right? Your ability to
Mhm.
think through a problem. And so I like the idea of assessment that's also kind of going at that, right? So that conversational bot so you come to it with a problem, right? You're struggling with something. And instead of the bot saying, oh, you got to go do this, this, and this, right? The bot says, so what are you thinking? Right? What do you think is next? And why do you think that's the right, step or the right order? What evidence do you have, that's leading you to that path? Right. And make you kind of think through it, talk it out loud, if you will. And then it kind of assesses and helps you, guides you to get there. Socratic questioning is part of that. For me, it's more about not just Socratic questioning, it's really about getting to that thought process, getting you, and you were talking about, it's kind of self-awareness, right? Getting you to really think about how do you process this, right? What are you doing?
Yeah, I love it. I actually think it's really clever. I mean, it is the conversational aspect allows you to really dig in deeply to the students' like train of thought. Like, what is their thought process like? That is so difficult to ascertain by asking them questions, right? Like, you're inferring that they have this specific misconception by answering this specific, question incorrectly in a certain way. But if they could explain what they were thinking, then that would be much
Yeah.
more clear. But we never asked them to do that by and large. And
Well,
yeah,
here's the other key to it. And I think so in curriculum design, because you have this in game design too, right? I make the correlation there as well. Sometimes you design something and you're just absolutely sure that the player of the game is going to see this and know what to do, right? And then of course they don't do that. They go do something else or they go all around it and don't do the thing you thought was so obvious you should pick that thing up, right? Use that, right? That's
oh
the
sure.
thing you need, the thing you're missing, right? But for some reason they don't. And so you have these kind of playtest sessions where you watch somebody play and then you have a conversation with them and you go, so why didn't you pick that thing up? Did you not notice that thing right there that we thought you were just going to trip over it in the game and you seem to just ignore it, right? So what it does is it helps you also tweak your design, or in this case, your curriculum, to say if they're thinking about it wrong, maybe the problem isn't them, maybe the problem is us and the way we explained it, the way we presented it, right? So you find the weakness in your own curriculum by picking up these patterns of how many students think about it incorrectly, right? Come to the wrong conclusion, the wrong assumptions, or don't connect the dots where it seems obvious to you. And you also get the expert problem often in curriculum. I had this problem, on the IT side. I taught computer science courses
Mhm.
at the
Yeah, sure.
university. And when you know it really well, it's hard to explain to somebody else because you tend to skip steps, right? It's just so obvious to you, but it's not obvious to them, right? So then you quiz them on something that just seems so obvious. And half of them get it wrong. And you go, why'd they get it wrong? And it's because I skipped half the information. It
Yep.
seemed obvious to me because I've been doing this stuff for 20 years, right?
Yeah, I always give the anecdote. I think I gave my best lectures on photosynthesis, even though I was a evolutionary geneticist who focused on, disease genes, that plants don't even have disease genes. Like, it's not even, so like completely far removed. But when I talked about like population genetics and natural selection and genetic drift, that stuff's just in my brain, right? And I think about it mathematically, which most students don't. So when I was teaching photosynthesis, I was a little bit closer to being a beginner, closer to them, and I could make it much more relatable. I
Mm.
think you're totally right on so many fronts here. I really think the idea of like these personalized learning paths are the right way to think about it, and having it be adaptive to every interaction, tweaking how the student moves through the curriculum. So you kind of think of it like as choose your own adventure thing, ultimately, that's driven by the AI in an ideal sense. Hopefully you don't, end up and go to page 35, you died sort of thing, like they did in those old books. But like it should be individual for each student. And it should be, we learn about your thinking and your comprehension of the topic. And then that gives the system options to figure it out. I do ultimately think that the best way for this to happen is to have an expert curate that, and an expert still around to give context to the student about their journey and offer empathy and whatnot to the learning scenario. But I think we're closer to that. And like I suggested earlier, this sort of adaptive study is kind of the next evolution in that, where it's still probably more focused on just the conceptual bit and not digging deeply into your thought process. But um, it's an iterative process, and it's moving very quickly.
It is. It is. And so, well, it also fascinates me in the data layer here. So again, in games, and sorry, I keep going back to this because this is where my brain goes, but you're collecting everything, right? I mean, I've done some educational games too, and we, time stamped every little thing so we could see how long somebody stays in one place, what decisions, right? The design was very clear around decisions. So everything in the game was around how do I get you to do, certain things, decide to do this versus do that, right? And we measured all of this stuff, in say the path through. So I think that these AI systems have this advantage, right? A teacher can't observe like that. She can't watch every student and figure out how much time are you spending on this, and you know where are you struggling, what did you skip, and go on and maybe come back later and take another crack at it, or hope that you found something else later that enlightened you and filled in the gap because I don't get this, but maybe there's something else that'll trigger it, and it'll go for me. But AI, right, can be watching all of those data points and putting it
Mm-hmm.
together. Now, I'm a huge proponent though of the teacher is still at the center of that learning experience, that the AI should be supporting the teacher, right? It's not just teaching you on its own. It's gathering all of this data. It may be adapting, some exercises and the flow of material or the difficulty, whatever, but it's feeding all of this also to the instructor. So they're seeing as well that, how you're doing compared to other students. And again, is the pacing wrong, you know, overall, or is it you? Anyway, there's so much work to be done here.
Love it. I mean, like I think of this. We've kind of given people learning analytics all along the way, but it's like sometimes it's difficult to parse and whatnot. And like I always joke about, like, really a lot of times professors don't realize that they've done it wrong until they find out, well, students failed this problem on the final exam, and then like, oh, when am I going to teach this class again? And remember that I should have altered my instruction to dig into that deeply.
Yep.
I think of exactly what you're talking about, Eric. My philosophy on this is think of the AI support that we can offer as being a flywheel between value to students and value to instructors. And so what you're talking about is personalized material for students, right? That's the driver of the efficiency of the student learning experience. But then that information delivered and aggregated and visualized in a really easy to understand way, going to the instructor in the form of some sort of learning analytics, that's supercharged by AI, right? Like not just like going to look at a grade book and we used to say, oh, this column, lower scores are red. And so you click on the column that's red and
Yeah.
then you go in and you dig in to find out what problem they were struggled on the most. No, like way beyond that in the point. So you're seeing this really rich data picture of your students that allows you to make the material even more personalized for the class and for individual students. And it just feeds upon itself in a way that makes your job easier, you better at your job as a teacher, and it means students get a much more personalized thing in the zone of proximal development. Let's go back to the beginning of the conversation, in a way that means they maybe spend a little less time on their chemistry course because they're getting an efficient experience, and they have more time for their other courses, and they have more time for their daily lives. I mean, I hope they don't just spend it on social media, but college is fun. It's a great place to be. Virginia Tech's right down the road, and when I drive through town on a Saturday night, the kids are having a good time, and they
Yeah.
should. It's a great option. But hopefully they don't have to spend 50 hours a week studying for their classes. If we could make that a little bit more efficient, maybe they'd have a better student, life balance.
Yep. Yep. Well, I have this crazy idea of that we don't time box the learning either, right? So right
Mm.
now, oh, it's a 16-week course, right? And there's going to be a final exam at the end, right? Instead, right, the system and the instructor are basically monitoring your progress individually, and and I know when you're ready to take that test, and you take it, and you might take it 3 weeks before somebody else, right? And so maybe and maybe it's a range, right? That just says, oh, it's designed as a 16-week course, but it could go 13 to 19 depending on your needs, right? And it could
It's a
be that you could have done it in 16, but you have this other course that's just killing you right now, and you had to put a little more time there. So you take that extra 3 weeks here because you can, right? And the system allows you to do that. But I know that's an organizational thing that
yeah.
universities aren't structured that way, and it's problematic. But I'd love to see us get to that point where, yeah, there's more flexibility to just say, yeah, you take it when you're ready to take it. And if that's, say, 19 weeks, if that's 24 weeks, whatever, I'm a faculty member. I'm here to take you through it, And the other thing is, it would also mean that I'm kind of onboarding students all the time, right? It's not one set group that goes through from beginning to end. There's students at different points in the curriculum all the time. And I don't know if that helps a faculty member, maybe a really experienced faculty member who really knows all the curriculum, and it doesn't matter where you are at any one point because they're not lecturing necessarily. That's another
Right.
thing of mine. Don't do
Yeah.
lectures. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the premise that you're describing, I think, is amazing, right? It would be really wonderful to be, I think of music education a lot because I'm a musician too. It's like, people learn at different paces for
Yeah.
sure on that front, and you want to keep every individual student in that perfect zone. And this is it goes back to that
Exactly.
same
Yeah.
idea. It's very difficult to do that. I once was teaching a biology class. Biology typically starts with thinking about some biochemistry. You got to learn your nucleic acids, your carbohydrates, your lipids, and your proteins. And we'd been through several lectures on this, and I had been describing saturated and unsaturated fats. And this one student raises his hand and says, why are there two lines in between those two carbons? That there was a double bond in between these carbons. But we'd been over this several times, and kind of the class gasped a little bit because clearly this guy was, he was really struggling. He had not understand in any of the last 3 or 4 lectures, because this was the most, remedial aspect of what we'd been talking about. But how do I teach him and then teach the kid who like had a chemistry set when they were 4 years old and were like building, like making cool compounds and things like that. That's really hard. I don't know that the universities are set up for this, but we think about this all the time. How could we facilitate that? I mean, we could make individualized learning paths for these students. And you take that adaptive study, it's just, well, the test is the adaptive study hitting some proficiency levels is maybe the gateway to get you into being able to take the exam. That's all it takes. So I think it'll take a sea change, Eric. But look, I think this AI revolution, we've been through a fair number of existential crises in education over the years, right? The printing press was like going to, be a disaster, and so was the internet, and so was Wikipedia, and all these things. But all of those things were also opportunities to transform ourselves. The crises is an opportunity,
Yeah.
and I think this, like if you were a random English professor assigning a wonderful novel and asking students to write an essay about it, that's probably not how you should proceed with your teaching. And maybe we shouldn't proceed with 18-week courses, and all students at the same pace. I'm on board with that. I'm not a person who believes in, the status quo, business as usual. Let's figure out a way to make it better.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, let's talk a little bit about Sam Altman, the
Yeah.
intelligence age, he calls it. So what
Yeah.
was your reaction? Obviously, it's very optimistic, but
Yeah. So, I mean, he's very optimistic in that. And I think that maybe, like I love that beginning bit where he says, magic for our grandparents, but real for our children. I think I think Sam's a little optimistic on the pace of things, maybe. I wonder if there's going to be an asymptote on some of these things. Like, think about our ability to help students on lower level mathematics versus higher level mathematics. And what these things are trained on is largely the bulk of what's available on the internet, right? And there's just not as much information on some of these really complicated, detailed things. So when he talks about like, we'll solve all of physics and whatnot, I'm like, maybe not right away. But I think it's really going to be interesting. I think it's also really imperative for us to think about this thing from an ethical perspective as well. And he's pretty good about talking about how, we got to be thoughtful about people's jobs and things like that. But I was asked recently, Eric, about should for-profit companies or not-for-profit companies lead the charge on the AI evolution? And I hedged my answer. I was like, well, I think it's a combination. Because look, Sam is doing a great job of pushing the boundaries. OpenAI is, I'm very excited to get the new voices as soon as they come to my phone. When the multimodal stuff came out, when you could have that, voice level conversation, I was blown away by the fact that I could like upload a picture and have like a graduate level conversation about that image. It felt like my oral qualifying exam when I was a PhD student. I mean, it's pretty amazing. It's only better with the new models that are coming out. But I also think that like there's got to be some checks and balances, and not-for-profit companies will be very good about thinking about that sort of thing. And there's people at OpenAI that have left very recently. Mira Murati left just this week because, I think they don't always agree on like the pace versus the safe. And so I think that that's important. I love when Sam talked about AI as a team, and we've already had this as part of our conversation today. I believe strongly that, the AI is not going to replace teachers, but AI that is used by teachers will make those teachers better than either an AI by itself or a teacher, even the best teachers. I think the best teachers will be AI empowered over the next years. If it's done right, it's like a team, right? They make up more than their individual constituent parts, right? 1+1 = 3. And I think that will be true. There's also an equity thing that I think really and he kind of alludes to this in the thing in the statement, but like, I was on a Inside Higher Ed webinar yesterday, and there was a woman from Morehouse College there that was talking about how they'd done a really neat partnership where they'd created these sort of Second Life type avatars, and everybody could use one at their university and even beyond. But many people from smaller schools were at that seminar saying, I can't get all my students access to these models, and how do we do this in an equitable way? And Pearson's thought about this really deeply. I mean, we may have to, we're a for-profit company, but we're trying as much as we can to make it so that this is not a thing for the haves and not a thing for the have-nots. So there's been no price increases for these features that we've added. We really want to make it about something that bolsters humanity in general, and not just something that exacerbates the divide in between the folks that have access to the best stuff and those that don't, because it is a pretty, there's a lot of disparity, I think, in the world right now. So I'm totally optimistic. I like his ideas about, the magic of yesterday is the reality of today. I like the team aspect. I think maybe it moves a little slower than what he's talking about specifically for some of the hardest things. And I think we really got to focus on the equitable side of things, because those are hard problems, and it probably does us right to move a little bit slower, but a little bit more thoughtfully about things. And frankly, OpenAI is not going to be the ones to probably do that, but it's going to be companies like Pearson, that think about how do we incorporate these things into real jobs for individual people and make those fit for the purpose, safe, and effective.
Yeah. So what do you see coming out the door in teachers and students' hands from Pearson in the next, say, 3 years? What's going to really, move the needle?
Yeah. I mean, I think you'll see some sort of, digital teaching assistants and learning assistants that are much more data informed across the board on the individual. I mean, that's really, so we've talked about the data layer and the knowledge layer of that. I think that's really where you'll see a lot of the hey. I mean, what we're doing, and you kind of mentioned this in the gaming industry a lot, is we're being very iterative and continuous for our validation efforts on this stuff. What are the tasks that a teacher has to do? And it's clear, Eric, like they don't want us to take over their teaching, but the job of a teacher is one that is very complicated and involves a lot of administrative tasks. So how can we create a resource that offloads some of those administrative tasks that they don't like to do, so they can focus on the things that they do the most? We're more focused on that than we are at taking over the teaching aspect of it. I mean, it's really about empowering them. So think about the learner side then. Well, one of the biggest challenges is managing your priorities as a college student. Or, my 12-year-old is a disaster at this, right? He doesn't know how to manage his time. And like every morning, it's like trying to get him out the door to catch the bus because he hasn't managed his time in the morning well. As these things learn more about you as an individual, maybe they help you become more efficient in your executive management of your function, right? I think that's a huge thing to think about. So it'll be a weird balance between like allowing these things to have access to your information if it makes you better at everything you do. So I think those types of things. So moving from the transactional to the longitudinal in a way that's really kind of empowers you throughout your day-to-day, helps you manage your time, helps really understand your learning journey and how to help you and your teaching journey, what you like best, give you more time for that, offload some of the things that challenge you the most. Those are the types of things that I think we're thinking about. Now, that longitudinal journey that we discussed, I think there's aspirations of Pearson to think about beyond the course level. So, why can't we say, you did this well in this mathematics course. Mathematics is the primary driver of how successful you are in general chemistry. Can we onboard you even faster into chemistry because we know about your math? Can we onboard you into your career by offering you some very specific things? Can we embed some more skill-focused things beyond just conceptual understanding of topics? These are things that we'll think about. And, hopefully someday there's like some way that you get done with the college curriculum and there's some resource that says these are the things you should focus on if you want to become a product manager, like
Right.
both soft skills and coursework that already understands your entire journey up to that point. I'm optimistic about these things big time.
Cool. I wonder, before we go, since you talked a bit about chemistry, I had a guest on the show who taught college chemistry for 25 years and was so frustrated, and you kind of alluded to some of it, right? That no matter how, much effort she put into it, many of her students who were also pre-med wouldn't be able to get through her course. And she developed different kind of characters and narratives and stories to try and help, and did find that it helped some, but she finally came to the conclusion that you had to teach these concepts earlier, and she called it molecular literacy. And she ended up going back and writing these comic books. So she used some of the characters and the narratives, and she wrote comic books geared towards fourth graders. And she got fourth graders to pass basically college level chemistry through comic books. And it was so impressive that another local organization did a documentary on her, and the documentary won an Emmy. So
I gotta watch.
anyway, yeah, look for that one. Her name's Colleen, and it's called Chemical Kids
Awesome.
is the solution. But it was brilliant.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like solution.
yeah,
I like it.
yeah.
um,
Molecular literacy. Yeah,
well, I think you present a couple really good ideas there. I mean, the fact that starting earlier is better. I mean, I think it can't be underscored enough. And then the other idea, the more that we can incorporate story into learning, human beings love stories. And I think there's one of the things AI will really foster is, like, think about a math course. Students aren't probably not that interested in their math course either. But like, what if you could make all the problems? What if on the fly, AI could make all the problems about something that they care about? Like, I'm going into my math assignment today and I type in, hey, I'm really excited about the Olympics. And now all the questions are rewrote that are on that topic. So I agree. Start early, story. These are things that, like, I don't know. I think there's real opportunities, but I'll watch the documentary. I love that idea.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Look for that episode. That was in season 2, fairly early in season 2. I think was my
Cool.
conversation with her. So
Awesome.
anyway, anything else you were hoping to talk about that we haven't covered?
I'm not really sure. I think I would just say for the teachers out there, stay the course, keep fighting the good fight. I think it is an opportunity to leverage some things that we're going to help build with you to make better, to really maybe transform learning in a way that has been past due. But we're at a moment in time where we have the opportunities to rethink how things we've been doing, and that could feel painful, but it also probably, when you come out of the fog of it on the other side, will be something that we can all be proud of.
Yeah. So I like to say, be optimistic, but also be brave. We need teachers to be brave. Go try it. It may not be perfect, but, work through it, because on the other side, things get better and better. Yeah.
It's a great philosophy, Eric. I This came up yesterday in that Inside Higher Ed thing as well.
Yeah.
I think everyone should force themselves to fail, right? Product development is this way 100%. An answer of you're not on the right track, if done early enough, is a wonderful answer because it
Yeah.
allows us to make sure. But you got to try things. I used to do these case studies all the time. Sometimes they didn't go well, but sometimes they were transformative. Try stuff, try new stuff. Do it in a thoughtful way. Don't try 15 things at once and then you don't know
Right.
which of the independent variables
Yeah.
modified the experience. Try things in a simpler, very scientific way, but try stuff. Try stuff because, when you nail something, it's just such a magic moment.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been a pleasure. It was great
Yeah,
talking with you.
I love talking about this stuff and I love your enthusiasm for the topic. So I'll look forward to more from you, Eric.
Yes, well, and yeah, keep me updated on the progress there. I'd love to hear what you guys are doing, and you know, yeah,
Sounds good. It's going to happen fast and furious, and we're going to try to do it in the best interest of the learners out there.
that's right. Fasten your seatbelts. Keep your hands and arms inside the vehicle at all times.
Hold on to your hats.
There we go. All right. Well, thanks, Chris. So we talked about a bunch of stuff, but Chris talked quite a bit. It kept coming up in this concept of proximal development and his comparison, right, of training for a triathlon and preparing for an exam. And this zone you get into where you're pushing yourself to get better, but not pushing so hard that you hurt yourself or you get, really frustrated. And I love that he was able to tie this concept back to curriculum design and how AI can really come in to help get your students into this zone of proximal development. So great stuff. We also talked a bit about games. I love to talk about games. Chris indulged me there a little bit, and he talked about it in terms of this dopamine hit. He called it. But for me, it's really, and we did talk about this, about feedback, right? And the ability to have that kind of sense for where you are and the progress that you're making, right? And this is kind of addictive, right? I keep making progress and I see myself leveling up. And so I keep going. So later, he also ties this back into an analogy about the flywheel effect, which I love. And so here he talks about how AI analyzes this large amount of data and then provides that, analyzes it and visualizes it for the teacher so they can then individualize and enhance the learning experiences for their students. And this iterative process kind of gains momentum as we go, right? As we make the experiences more effective and more efficient and optimized for the student, right? They have better, work balance. I get work-life balance, if you will, less stress. And so again, it kind of the momentum keeps feeding itself, which is the definition of the flywheel effect. So thanks to Chris for all of those insights and his vision for the future of education and AI. So if you haven't yet subscribed, I'm going to make a plug here to get you to subscribe, because a podcast also leverages the flywheel effect, if you will, right? The more people who listen, the more guests I get, and the more great stories I have to share of innovation and education. So please subscribe, please share. Let's get some momentum going here too. And if you yourself or you know someone who could be a great guest on the show, please reach out. I'd love to hear from you so I can share your story. All right. I'm Eric Byron. Thanks for listening to the Education Innovators podcast, and thanks to all those education innovators out there. You are making a difference.